Okay, I'm just about to the end. I'm going to show y'all a little trick that I had to learn the hard way. Alright, see, this is where I started at. See, it's a straight square. When I first started doing the alterations of, gosh, over 10 years ago, when I first started doing alterations, what I found happened is I would start at an angle. And mainly I learned it on the bridal gowns because when you get right to the train from the front when you do an alteration, you have to taper and cut slowly into the train. So it's not obvious. It's not just chopped off and stopped. Well, I found what happened is when I'm going all the way around the gown and I do that, is I can't see where I stopped cutting. And I have to go back and remeasure again is what happens to make sure I'm in the right pattern. So what I figured out to do is start cutting an X right where you stop and start. And then that way it's no question as to where I started and where I stopped at. So I am finished here with this part. And as you see, there's going to be quite a bit of remnant. And what I do now is I don't keep remnants. I used to when I first opened my shop years ago. Oh my gosh, I had to hire people to come in and keep things organized. And the thing that they spent most of their time on was my remnants, putting the satins with the satins, the silks with the silks, the cottons with the cottons, the chiffons. I mean, it just was a mess. And I found out what ended up happening was I just kept moving the stuff around. Is all that happened. And then, of course, fabrics, they're like clothes. They go out of date, they go out of style, they get changed up, they no longer carry them. Or even there's a variance color in between different bolts just because it's coming off a different machine and maybe perhaps a different day. So what I do now is I just fold them up real nice and neat. I give them back to the client. If they don't want them, then I throw it away. There's a few exceptions. I will keep a few pieces, like hard to find pieces, such as like pure silk. I will keep, little pieces of those, unless the client asks for it, of course. But other than that, I don't haul that stuff around no more. I don't keep it. I don't even try to keep it to sell it. And I know that there's people who love stashes and do that and buy that, but I don't have the space. I don't have the time. And when I did have the space, I found that I filled it up with a lot of stuff that was not profitable for me in the end. It just took up space, and that's all that it served. So I don't do that anymore, which is why I'm able to be able to profit from what I make in my sewing and use it for everyday living instead of constantly putting it back into a studio. So, yeah, that's what I do. I found it works for me. If you've got different resources in different ways, that's fine. I mean, I'm not married. I don't have a rich daddy, so I have to do what financially is going to be best for me that brings the most peace. Okay. All right. So now I have my gown ready for putting the horsehair hem back on it. So, of course, I'm going to go ahead and get a cloth and I'm going to wipe these out. I'm going to show you how these wipe right out. So, I'll be right back. Okay, what I've done is I've gone and got a washcloth. I just dampened a little piece, that's all I did, just a little corner. And go back to here, and I'm going to gently wipe it off. And it'll disappear, and then I'll take the dry side of the cloth and just wipe it. Now, if you're working with satin or silk and doing this, or even the blends of the satins and the satines, don't do this unless you have a hair dryer. Put a hair dryer close by you because you can't let this air dry because it will water stain on those fabrics. But this, it won't on this type fabric. So I'm just drying it by hand with the towel, and it won't leave a water stain. And that way I know that it's not going to leave any permanent grease marks, because it won't leave, these chalks I found, they don't leave the color, but they'll leave behind an oily film is what they leave behind. And see, it's already drying up. So I don't like to use them on a lot of the bridal fabrics. And again, these type fabrics, it is forgiving. So I don't worry so much about those. See how it's drying up? And by the time I finish doing up my alteration, it'll be completely dry. But the marks they're gone. So just some benefits to using pen versus markers. Okay. Now what's going to happen with this horsehair braiding is I'm going to end up cutting some of it because it's going to be short. It's going to be shorter than what it started off with because I have less gown to work with now because the gown narrowed as it went up. So I'm fine where it's joined at, and I'm just going to separate it there. And again, do not cut your horsehair braiding if you can help it. And this is not actually, I don't think this is sewn. It looks like it's some kind of glue. No, it's sewn. It's sewn. Okay. Okay, when you get to the bottom, you've got the fabric holding it together, so you're actually going to have to separate your seam bind, your top stitching, and then cut it loose from the fabric. Not cutting the horsehair braid, but cutting the fabric. Don't cut the horsehair braid. See where it's attached? It's only the fabric's got it attached, so I just separate it. So, see how much extra was folded over? That is needed because when you're working with horsehair braid, here's a perfect example. It will unfray. See how it separates right there? Can you see that? See how it separates? It will just keep going and going and going. So by allowing a pretty deep fold, even if it starts unraveling, it's not going to get down into there to where it's going to affect the hem. So that was really smart, whoever did this. Alright, so now what I'll do is I like to start in a seam. See, and that's still attached there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate that some more and get that fabric cut off of there so I have a starting point. And again, be careful not to cut that nylon if at all possible. So what I'm going to do, because I know I'm going to lose some of this nylon, so I'm going to start my fold over here. Okay. Okay, now what I'm doing here is I need to determine how deep I want to go with this horsehair braid. Because remember, I want to cover up the edging, so I'm going to make it a little deeper than just this narrow original hem that was cut off of. So I want it to be a little deeper. So I'm just determining, I'm here at the seam, the side seam, because I want it to start there so it's not rubbing against her legs and where it's a smooth start and stop. So I'm going to guess, because my measurement's going to be there, because this is going to be rolled over and under. So I need to give myself enough space to allow that roll and still end up in my finished spot. So I'm gonna start down here. I'm just gonna start at the very bottom and just go a little up, because again I want to cover that excess that I had to cut off. So instead of sewing down here, I'm moving up on my stitches. So again, I'm using the needles as if I was sewing it in the place of where the needles are at, just so I can see how it's going to be. All right, 3. All right, now I've got it pinned in place. I'm pretending that's where it's going to be sewn at. So let me flip it around and let's see if it's going to end up where it needs to be hemmed, where the hem needs to end up at. And I've got it too deep, so right now the gown would be too short. So I need to not go so deep. So I'm going to bring my stitch down further. Now when you're doing a horsehair braid, don't start at the end, even if it's at your fold. Don't start at the end, because you're going to need to join those two ends together when they meet to each other. So always leave an excess here, because you can always go back and sew down that little bit that's going to be there. But you need to have enough room to go and sew the two pieces together when you join them. All right, now let me flip it around. Let's see if I'm going to end up in the right spot. Yep, perfect. So that's going to put me having a hem about that deep. So it's enough. It's very sufficient to cover up where I cut off and left the excess fabric. And for me, I don't know about you, but if I can avoid pinning something down, I'm going to avoid it. So I see where I need to make my measurements at. So what I'm going to do is just put the horsehair braid down to the gown so that it's still and so that it's all placed, and it's not going to accidentally end up being stretched. And so I'm just putting it in place onto the gown, and then I'm going to go back with my machine, and I know that I'm sewing just right above the edge of the original line, and I'm just going to go down and sew it. I'm not even going to mark it. I'm not even going to pin it or anything, because I know that it's going to fold and end up where I need it to. So I'll just put this in place. And really, I probably don't even need to do this part, but for me, I'd rather err in it being safe, because I am working again with a stretchy material. So I don't want the machine to stretch and pull the gown as I'm sewing and me not even realize it. By me having it pinned like this, I'll be able to see in between each pin if there's going to be excess fabric. Because right now there's no excess fabric because it's not being stretched. I'm just letting it lay naturally as it needs to into the horsehair. When you're attaching horsehair braid, I don't have that problem right now because this is stabilized already, because I left the fabric on the edge of this. But if I did not have that, you do not stretch this as you're putting it on. You actually will be pushing together. Don't stretch it as you're sewing and pinning in place. Push it together. Not crazy push together, but push it together. Don't allow it to pull apart, because it's going to cause your gown to have waves in it. It's not going to lay flat. So keep that in mind when you're working with horsehair braid. And you can buy all kinds of colors, such as what's on this gown, but it is a specialty item that is not normally carried here in the studio or even in Houston. So, I have to go to these special stores to get it, and they're across town, and they're during business hours, and it's hard to get down there for me. So, I don't carry it. I don't. I just do what I'm doing right now. I just reuse what the client already had on the gown, because it's already a perfect match anyhow. And then I found that whenever I was purchasing items and keeping things on stock, like if I was a fabric store, I found what was happening was that a lot of stuff was going out of date. It was no longer fashionable to do whatever. And again, just like the remnants, I was hauling around stuff that was not being used. It was not to my benefit. It was, costing money to keep it because of the space I was having to rent to keep it and to have the storage room. So it just wasn't worth it. And having to hire people to keep things organized and in order for me, it just was not worth it in the end. So I don't keep stuff around unless I absolutely need it. If it's something I use on a regular basis, yes, I will buy it in bulk. Other than that, no, I buy as I need it. And I compensate the time that's needed for shipping and all. I keep that in mind whenever I am doing fittings, so that way I can know how to schedule for returns of pickups and drop-offs of the gowns, because I can't say, yeah, I can have your gown back to you in 2 weeks if it's going to take a week for me to get an item into the studio before I even get to start sewing. So keep that in mind whenever you are doing a consult or a fitting with a client, because we don't want to keep them waiting because of something we don't have on stock, or because it's difficult, or we have to drive out of town or wait on shipping. So that's not fair to the client. They're coming to us, they think that we already have access to all this stuff, and which we do, so they don't understand those things. So it's you that needs to be the one to bear that burden, not, burden down the client, especially in bridal. They've got so much they're already worried and concerned about. They hire professionals because they don't want the stress on top of all the other stress. They want to be able to enjoy their day and their moment, not be worried and just full of chaos and confusion and stress. So, do what you can to make things comfortable for your bride and the bridal party so that they can enjoy the day and enjoy the memories that are being built. The last thing that I would want is for a memory to be 10 years down the road and have a conversation between the bride and the bridesmaids. Oh, you remember our wedding day? Yeah. And, oh, do you remember that seamstress? How horrible she was and how mean she was. And no, I don't want that to be a part of their memories. No. If they don't even bring me up and the work that I've done, then I take that as a compliment, because it tells me that they had no issues that even brought it to the forefront of their thought process, even think about their seamstress. So, to me, that's a compliment. Now, of course, I'd love the compliments, the brides that would say, remember that bustle? We had I don't know, I'm being exaggerative. We had a 6-foot long train bustle to be bustled up, and that seamstress did an awesome job on bringing all that up to the gown and not making my booty look like it was 3 feet tall. And of course we want to be recognized for the miracles we pull out of our hat every day whenever we're performing these gifts of talents, or whatever you want to call them, for the brides to be able to have the gown that they desire. We pull miracles out of our pockets every day for people, and it's not acknowledged except for amongst us seamstress, because we know what we have to do to make something work. Your client does not know that. That's why they come to you. So, if they don't give you compliments every time or any time at all, just know it's because they trusted you to do a professional job, to do something that they did not know anything about, and they don't know what happened behind the scenes to get the gown to the finished product. So, get you a support group of other seamstress. If you're married, and have a support group in your spouse, that's great. If you don't, then get you some friends, a circle of friends. I call them a tribe. Find your tribe. Find your tribe. Find where you belong, because then you're gonna feel comfortable in your own skin, and you're not going to be dependent upon strangers to fill that void in your life of acknowledgments and accomplishments in life. So, all right, so I'm getting close to the end of this, and my horsehair braid is being pinned down. I see I'm going to have to find a different way to set up the camera, but y'all be patient with me as I'm figuring these things out. I'm waiting on some lights to come, so right now I'm really restricted on how much I can do in the sewing room right now without the proper lighting. So I've got my horsehair braid pinned in place. So now I'll be going to the machine and I'm going to sew just right above the original hemline, because again I'm wanting to cover the material that I left on the end of the horsehair braid. So alright, I'm going to the machine. I'll be back with y'all.